How much of a fan of the Uncharted series are you? Yeah, I thought you would be. Me? Well, I suppose it's time for a little bit of a confession. Anyone who knows me will know that PlayStation has been my gaming console of choice throughout all my life. Yeah, I own all the other consoles, but 90% of the time you'll find me on the PS3 or PS4. That being said, now, are you ready for this? Well, up until this week, I have never actually played an Uncharted game. I know, it's despicable for someone who calls themselves a PlayStation gamer to have never so much as touched the series. It's on par with a Nintendo fan having never played Mario, and I bet you're out there somewhere. But that aside, after just finishing up Just Cause 3 and having a bit of extra money left from birthday and Christmas presents, I decided I'd take the plunge, get the collection, and finally see what all the hype is about. So, in this 3-part special, I'll be looking at Uncharted, the Nathan Drake collection, which includes the first 3 games from the Uncharted series. It's a perfect little neat package for anyone to pick up ahead of the release of Uncharted 4. So first up, Uncharted, Drake's Fortune. Uncharted first made its splash in the pool back in November of 2007. The developers over at Naughty Dog, whose previous endeavours included the likes of the incredibly popular Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter series, had established themselves as a gaming company that makes games that are, shall we say, on the lighter side of the spectrum. With quirky graphics and playful sounds the norm there, it came as a surprise to many when it was announced that they'd be starting a whole new IP with Uncharted. A series that would certainly be taking a step away from the quirky graphics and playful sounds in favour of a more deep and theatrical story revolving around the main character, the ever-charming Nathan Drake. Drake and his ragtag group of companions, journalist Eleanor Fisher and fellow treasure hunter and mentor of some form, Victor Sullivan, are on a quest to retrace the steps of Drake's ancestor Francis Drake, who is in search of the coveted El Dorado. Using breadcrumbs left behind by Francis and pursued relentlessly by militia and pirates, who also seek the spoils, the threesome find out that the treasure is the least of their problems. Now would probably be a good time to include some sort of spoiler warning, so yeah, spoilers ahead. Here's a brief rundown of the story for you. We kick the story off just off the coast of Panama and join Drake and Eleanor doing some routine grave robbing. However, it wasn't the body of Francis Drake they were looking for, but rather his journal. With this in hand, the adventure can finally begin. After a bit of a bust-up with some less than friendly pirates, Nathan and Victor decide they're onto something big and decide to ditch the reporter, learning that Francis faked his death and went in search of El Dorado. They decide that is exactly what their next prize would be.
Should have seen that one coming. Ugh.
After following their map thing and turning up in some tomb, they find that the City of Gold has been picked clean by the Spanish already. And there's nothing left there apart from a few helmets. Needless to say, they are not impressed.
I'm up to my eyeballs in debt!
However, after doing a bit more digging around in the tomb, they learn that El Dorado is not a city of gold, but is in fact a huge golden statue, learning in the process that it has been taken by the Spanish, so they decide to follow the tracks. A bit further along, and our dynamic duo come across a German U-boat that's just casually been washed up on the shore. Nathan being Nathan decides to go and check it out, and finds that the boat is full of dead dudes, and they have some rather strange looking coins on them, and the markings of which no one really recognises. Drake finds the captain dead in the, get this, captain's quarters, who would have thought. In his possession is the missing page from Francis's journal detailing where the treasure actually is, but excitement is short-lived as radio communications with Sullivan are cut off. Cue the introduction of Gabriel Roman and his henchman Navarro. Long story short, Sullivan's dead, but that's not so bad since Eleanor is back on the scene and she's packing heat. The two get hold of a plane somehow and make their way to an unnamed, or should we say uncharted island, but apparently neither of them can fly and they crash. Might have had something to do with the surface-to-air missile turrets, but that's just speculation at this point. So, the two are separated again, and Drake goes in hunt to find his new partner. After some time, he sees her acting rather strangely, and then turns into a sim. Some creepy stalking then ensues, which unsurprisingly ends up with the distracted Drake thrown in jail. Here we meet the lovely Eddie Raja, and a quick jailbreak later and we're back on our way. After a few jet ski rides and some character building, we have a plot twist. Sullivan isn't dead, and he seems a bit too friendly with our missionary guys. This then becomes a rescue mission, never a dull moment. So, a Rambo-style shootout ensues, and all is well, as Sullivan, Drake, and our lovely reporter Eleanor are reunited. And, after sending the pirates on the militia on a wild goose chase, the treasure hunt is back on. Sullivan realises that the treasure is in the vault on the island's monastery, so off they go to get it. Things take a strange turn then, as Drake and Eleanor end up in what looks like some old World War II underground bunker that seems to be full of, well, when I saw them I thought they were Wendigos, but it turns out that they are what is left of the Spanish guys that originally found El Dorado. This leads to Eddie getting his exit in the form of a mauling. Then crisis strikes as Roman and Navarro take the statue and Eleanor as insurance to make sure that Drake doesn't do anything stupid. Realising the power that the statue has and knowing that it should never leave the island, Drake decides to do something incredibly stupid and pursues them. With one last-ditch effort, Drake clings for dear life to the statue and is being lifted away by Navarro, who decides to ditch Roman after showing everyone exactly what the statue can do. One more crash and a boat fight scene later and the story is over. The statue and Navarro are at the bottom of the ocean and our heroes ride into the sunset with their newly salvaged treasure. Happy days! So, is it a good story? Right, before I get into that I have another confession to make. I have never actually seen or had any interest in seeing the Pirates of the Caribbean. However, I have been informed by a reliable source that this story is very, very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean. I can't comment on that, but I could definitely see some influence at the very least. So, let's get to the meat and veg of the story. Is it good? Well, it's not fantastic, and the rat race concept is nothing new or refreshing, and the ending I saw coming from about 200 miles away. All that taken into consideration, despite the throwaway elements of the game such as the coins and the non-relationship between Drake and Eddie that I really wanted to see develop more, the story ultimately is sufficient enough to keep me playing, and this is largely due to the character relationships that we do get to see develop. The characters themselves are great, and for the first time in a long time I actually cared about them. In fact, for the first time in a long time, the characters of this game actually had character, and because of that I can't wait to play the other games. So now we know what happens in the game, let's take a look into the ins and outs of the game itself. This being a remaster, the graphics have been upgraded somewhat from the original 2007 release, but seeing as I've never actually played them, I can't make a fair comparison between them. So, I can only really look at this as a game released in 2015. I will, however, take into consideration that this is a remaster and the graphics are not going to be as good as a modern game. Not that this isn't a modern game, but I think you get where I'm coming from. So does it look good? Well, the short answer is yes, it does. The game runs at a smooth 60 frames per second, never dropping below that, which is more than can be said for some games these days. Textures are detailed enough to know what you're looking at, which is always a plus in my book. Lighting for the most part is generally good. Ambient lighting from wall torches and flashlights do add to the atmosphere of the game, but every now and then I did find the game a little bit dark in places. Not as dark as to not be able to see what I'm doing, but dark enough to sometimes not know who's shooting at me. Certainly nothing that stopped me from being able to play, and this was truly just a passing thought while I was playing. Of course, there is an option to up the brightness if you do find that this is an issue, but honestly, the parts that I felt this way are few and far between. The character models and movements are okay. I wouldn't say that I was blown away by them, but again, we have to remember that this is a remaster. Saying that, I'd say that even for 2007, they were perhaps average for the time. Movements are fluid no matter what you're doing, whether it's a gunfight, climbing a building, or just walking around admiring the view. And what a view it is! The backdrops for almost the entire game are great. You really do get a feel for the environment, and this is due to the attention to detail. For example, running around tombs, you'll come across the skeletal remains of not so fortunate treasure hunters, or roaming the jungle, you'll come across various jungle life, be that birds or the occasional monkey. You can't kill them though, not that I tried, with a grenade launcher. Taking everything into consideration, when it comes to graphics, and bearing in mind that this is a remaster, I'll have to say that visually the game holds its own. It's nothing special, and even back in 2007 I don't think it'd be anything out of the ordinary, but they do hold your attention and immerse you in the game, and that in my book is the job of the graphics, so well done on that part. So here's where my first real gripe comes into play. The soundtrack for this game is very Indiana Jones, orchestral music from time to time, and the odd triumphant trumpet sound for me does not make a game. Can I remember any of the soundtrack? No, I honestly can't. The musical score for a game, to me personally, goes hand in hand with the graphics. Honestly, I'd rather have a top-notch soundtrack and subpar graphics. Look at the Silent Hill series. And in fact, the first game for that matter, graphics sucked, but the soundtrack was phenomenal. Where the game does excel is in the voice acting of the characters. Nolan North, the voice actor for Nathan Drake, did a fantastic job. He portrayed exactly the emotions that the character would be feeling at the time. At least I think so. Charming and witty for the most part, making comments on just about everything he comes across in a sarcastic way, just as I'd imagined Drake would do. Then when it comes to something a bit more serious, well, he portrayed that fantastically too. I honestly do think that it was a very well-rounded and solid performance, and that goes for all the other characters as well. Other than Drake, another personal favourite of mine was Roman, the bad guy. He has the stereotypical British accent, and we've all come to expect this from a baddie in any movie or game these days, but he definitely got across the fact that he was cold, calculated, and almost psychopathic, and I love that. That being said, the ambient sounds, well, again, I wasn't all that impressed. Despite the occasional echoing indoors and leaves rustling on the ground under your feet, it was again completely unremarkable. Now, I don't know if that's me being desensitized by all the modern day soundtracks that accompany games, or if it's just the game itself, but for me personally, and you have to remember this is just my opinion, the soundtrack for this game was really disappointing, and I really hope it improves as we move on to the next games. Alright, so we've heard the story, know what it looks like, and we know what it sounds like, so let's move on to the controls and general gameplay of the game. First thing that I should probably point out is the controls of Drake. They are really good, smooth and reactive to every input, making controlling the game a genuine pleasure, but contextual controls can be a real pain. Getting Drake to jump to a specific area when hanging in particular. I personally died at least 10 times throughout my playthroughs of the game, which in itself doesn't seem like that many, but this is where the checkpoints of the game come into play. The checkpoints have some sort of bipolar disorder. They're either great and not too far from each other, so that death becomes less of an issue, which is useful for the higher difficulty settings, or on the other hand, they are punishing and unforgiving and penalise you for making silly mistakes that are not always your fault and can send you right back to the beginning of a level. Now, I briefly mentioned the difficulty levels, and I have to say that they're disappointing. And what do I mean by that? Oh, let me explain. The game comes with your bog standard easy, medium and hard, then we move into the realms of crushing and brutal difficulty. The difference between easy and hard is certainly noticeable, more enemies to kill and less hits for Drake to do that in. However, the difference between hard, crushing and brutal is negligible. I have to admit, as a trophy hunter, I wasn't looking forward to having to complete the game on these higher difficulties, but the names are really misleading, and if you can finish the game on hard, you will have no issue finishing the game on brutal. I do like a challenge, and I think I hyped these difficulties up a bit more than they were worth in my mind, because when it came to actually doing them, I have to say I was disappointed when I managed to finish the game in a mere 4 hours on brutal. The control scheme in itself is very good. Everything that you need to do to be effective is very intuitive. Taking cover and switching weapons is fluid, and I personally think the game has what I like to call Mortal Kombat syndrome. It's the ability to look like you know what you're doing, even though in reality you're just playing a guessing game and trying every button to see what they do. Now, even though getting into cover during firefights is easy to do, the controls when it comes to maneuvering in cover are very clunky, and you will die a lot due to the fact that Drake is not actually doing what you want him to do. The on-screen tips at the beginning make out that all you have to do to move around in cover is press either the circle or X buttons, which in reality, doing this will just make you exit cover. There are controls to move from cover to cover, but I could never get them to work properly, and for me it became easier to completely come out, move somewhere else, and get back into cover. Gunplay is great fun, especially when it comes to causing explosions, and this is largely due to the hilarious ragdoll system that the game uses. Enemies will literally go flying and tumble through space when exploded. However, when it comes to killing enemies with bullets, this can be another point of frustration. Enemies can take an unreal amount of punishment, some taking up to 15 shots to actually kill them. This, next to the fact that you are usually up against upwards of 10 enemies at a time, can make for some really frustrating and challenging parts, even on the easier difficulties. It eventually breaks down to just doing the same parts over and over again until you learn the spawning patterns of the enemies and just taking them down before they can really get into a decent position. Now, I liken this game to God of War. In fact, it feels very similar, which by itself is not an issue. I love those games, but that does mean that throughout the story you are often asked to engage in seemingly pointless QuickTime events. Now, when I was growing up, a cutscene was a cutscene. You sit back and enjoy the fruits of your labour with a nice movie. But these days you're always on edge because you never know when you're going to suddenly be asked to quickly press a button, and missing this button will often cause you to die and have to go through it all again. Now, I'm not entirely sure where I would actually include this in a review, but if you're a fan of dramatic set pieces and or you're one of these people that take selfies to celebrate the day that ends in a Y, then you might be interested in the photo mode option. I can only assume it's a new addition as part of the remaster, as it utilises the share function of the PlayStation 4. It gives you a completely controllable camera to take pictures or screenshots and upload them. On the other hand, if you're like me, then you'll probably see this as a potential waste of time and development resources that could have been better spent elsewhere. One thing I did enjoy was the friend stat notifications. If you've ever played a Fable game, you'll understand what I mean. Coming up from time to time on the screen are stats that pit you against your friends indirectly. For example, getting my 200th headshot, the game let me know that I was now the highest scoring person on my friends list of 9 people, only one of them actually owning the game, so yeah, go me. That aside, it's stats, and I love stats, so more of this please. Tutorial hints are enabled by default, and do help you get into the swing of things from the beginning, but they can be a little bit annoying on your second or third playthrough. However, fret not, you can flick the switch and turn these off. You do get some control options, albeit kind of limited. You have a choice from a this or that kind of system, and speaking as someone who will just learn the controls of a game rather than trying to make them revolve around me, this is fine, but I do appreciate some people have got to edit the controls to fit around them, and this system doesn't really give you that option. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I know this is a remaster, but fully mappable controls are something that in this day of age I would expect to be standard issue. All in all, the game controls well and is very intuitive, but the important question is, and always will be when it comes to a game, is it fun? Certainly is. The story is a little bit short and falls a little bit flat in some places, but at no point during my sessions with this game did I ever think about turning the game off or dread doing the next thing. Even on the harder difficulties, I had a blast. In fact, I would recommend that if you're going to play this game, jump straight in at the deep end and go for one of the harder difficulties. I know I said they're not that hard, and really they're not. There is a very fine line between challenging and frustrating, and this game definitely falls in favour of challenging. So that, in combination with a story that you will want to finish, ultimately leads to a very fun and fulfilling experience. Replayability in this game is a very strong point and something that deserves a lot of credit. In fact, you could argue that the short length of the story aids to the replayability, as you won't have to worry about taking forever to do it all again. Throughout the game, and by meeting certain criteria, you'll unlock alternative skins for Drake that range from playing as Sullivan all the way to an alternative costume that makes Drake look like he's been treasure hunting in KFC. Along with that comes the tweaks that you can unlock. These are essentially cheats, and they give you one-hit kills and unlimited ammo, things of that nature. There are a few pointless ones, such as Mirror World or Flip, which I don't know why anyone would use, as it just ups the difficulty to ridiculous levels. But it can be said that they do add something new to the game, and if you're looking for even more of a challenge, why not? If, like me, you're a trophy hunter, then the game is great for that. Personally, I got the Platinum Trophy, and what the game does that is great is it actually splits the collectible trophies into a separate trophy file, meaning that you can get the Platinum without having to do the really grindy trophies. A welcome addition and something that I hope to see more of in the future. One thing that I would have liked though was if the skins actually added certain effects to your character, a lot like in the God of War series, but you can't have everything. All in all, Uncharted Drake's Fortune is a very strong start to a series, and it hits the right notes at the right time, and as a launching pad for someone who has only just started to get into the series like myself, it definitely makes me want to play the sequels and makes me even more excited for the release of Uncharted 4 later this year. There's very little that I can honestly say I don't like about the game, and the pros massively outweigh the cons, so if I had to put a number on it, I'd give it a very strong 4 out of 5.